The way as leaders that we forge and frame identity is the key to the way people respond to things. There's got to be a lot of breaking down of this concept that you are fundamentally only one identity. I have to look and reinterpret my own life and the happenings of my life to see myself differently to the way I've always seen me or the way society has seen me.
Frame it up for anybody who might be listening to this thinking, I am ready for change, but I'm a little bit scared by it as well. Welcome back to Live Into Your Brilliance, the place where we dismantle illusions and wake ourselves up to the truth that's already here. Imagine that your identity is actually the ceiling on your potential. Most of us never really question our identity. We mistake our job, our past, or our pain for defining who we are. But the truth is, identity isn't static. It's constructed, and once you realize that, the whole game changes. Today's guest is Knighton. He leads one of the most impactful organizations in South Africa, helping people move from being on the streets to fully integrating back into society. But he's not fixing them. He's doing it by changing their belief system about who they actually are. He's consulted with global leaders, he's won international awards, and this model has been adopted by cities like Boston and Los Angeles. And what's most interesting in this conversation is his insight into why people are stuck and why they stay stuck. So if you want to understand the real mechanics of change for yourself, it starts here. Because identity is either your prison or it's your portal. As always, we started by asking Jean-Ray, what is right at the heart of what he's seeing as the greatest possibility for us all?
The issue of identity is what's stuck with me over the last little while, that your core identity, or how you understand yourself to be, and what that means for you, what you understand that to mean. So who am I and what does that mean for the way I must act and respond to the world around me, is the biggest driver of everything you're going to do, everything you're going to achieve, everything you're not going to achieve. And by extension, because most of my, U-Turn is the third organization I've been the CEO of, been in leadership for many, many years. So I think very much from a leadership perspective. I did some postgraduate studies in business and leadership. And I was really interested in this issue of a social movement and what catalyzes change in large numbers of people or moves large numbers of people to catalyze change in society. And it came down once again to this issue of identity. The core of social movement is identity. And the way as leaders that we forge and frame identity, for good or evil, is the key to the way people respond to things, whether it's our employees, whether it's members in our Rotary Club, whether it's in politics or in any other field, or in the social sphere, we're in the nonprofit sphere. So I look at identity and how we shape identity, how we determine it, because a lot of what leaders are doing is using the narratives to shape identity. Who are we as individuals and who are we collectively, and what does that mean? And so when people respond from a space of identity, to say, I do this not because somebody told me to do this, but I do this because it's an extension of who I am, then you get a very, very powerful driver. I mean, we can unpack that a little bit more, and I can unpack it perhaps in my own life and then also the work we do. But I do think this is part of the deep responsibility in leadership. Because what we are doing is we're taking the narratives and the stories and we're creating identity out of them. We're saying, this is how we are. This is who we are. And if we are this, then this is how we respond. I think a lot of Steve Biko and Black consciousness in South Africa, and the way that affected the whole sort of Black consciousness movement worldwide, was this defining of identity as being Black. And in our country, in South Africa, you had this division between Black, what we call colored, which is mixed race. I know that word doesn't fly well in other parts of the world, but that's how it's used here, or Indian. And this idea of no, we are not these things, we are Black. And to be Black means it leans heavily into the concept of Ubuntu. So Biko and others lent into that space to say to be Black means to practice Ubuntu, or to understand Ubuntu, the deep connection between people. It means to be oppressed, and it calls us to throw off oppression. And it was that framework. I mean, think of other things like in the Polish Solidarity movement, where the shift from we are communist to we are Catholic in terms of identity was the profound shift which began the fall of communism in Poland. And so you can go on and on. But I think we, as I say, we have a responsibility to ourselves to think about, who am I? I know even within my own home, I would say to my kids, no, as a Knighton fit, we don't do that. We do this. And it's grounded in, we behave this way because of who we are. Another beautiful thing, I think of it in the sort of the identity space, has been a former president in South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, who did this incredible speech, which still can move you to tears if you're a South African, called "I Am an African." And again, he frames, what does it mean to be African? And this is not a white African or a Black African or a Zulu African or a Xhosa African, but to be an African. And it calls us to a different kind of identity from perhaps where we stuck. But within homelessness, I've looked at kind of broadly three narratives around homeless people. So how does society look at homelessness? How do homeless people look at themselves? And you've got the one narrative, which is I've called the Pied Piper narrative, let's say, which is essentially sees the homeless person or community as the vermin, the criminals, the addicts who live on the street and threaten all the townspeople of, let's say, Hamlin or Boston or Cape Town, who are the victims in the situation. So in this space, the homeless person is the villain. And this narrative really lives on the WhatsApp, the community, the neighborhood watches and community groups. And, it's like homeless person sleeping there, please get law enforcement in to remove them. But homeless people see themselves often in that way. And they connect to that identity. I am the villain. This is who I am and what I do. Or you get that kind of, what I would call maybe the Superman narrative, which is more, the poor homeless person who's there through no fault of their own and need rescuing. I mean, they're the victim, not the villain. And somebody needs to come in and rescue them. And there's always a few willing rescuers. And then they start to see themselves that way. Or it's one of the identities you can adopt. I am powerless. I have done nothing. There's nothing I can do. I just, and in fact, it leads to an entitlement kind of mindset, which is, a mistake was given to me. In fact, it's owed to me because I've had such a terrible life. And both of those kind of narratives are very disempowering, actually, very, very disempowering.
Mm-hmm.
And so we deliberately in this space work towards a hero or a potential hero narrative, which is, the power to overcome lies within you. And you are going to go through immense trials and difficulties to overcome your addiction or your relationships that you broke down by stealing things from your mother or whatever it is, terrorizing the neighborhood, stabbing, raping. You're going to have to own it and you're going to have to overcome it no matter how. And all of, so for a homeless person, they could adopt any of these things. Because I'm the villain, I'm the victim, or I am this hero waiting to be born who's going to overcome enormous odds. And just the shift. So for us, an important thing is also shifting how you see yourself. Uh, Who am I, and what does that mean? Am I a gangster? Am I homeless? Or am I a person with potential? So we do a lot of sort of looking or sort of emphasizing I suppose, the core humanness of all of us, whether we're on the street, off the street, a donor, volunteer, client, that we are essentially all human. And then the framing of humanness is around value. We see you as valuable because you're human. We see you as full of potential. You can succeed. So I think in our space that this has been an important thing in terms of understanding how do you get people to overcome their own obstacles.
Mm.
But yeah, I think even in my own life, if I think of my school days when I was not good at sport and I was not that good academically, I thought, and struggled socially, and so I saw myself as a bit of a misfit and an outcast and didn't fit in. And the more you see yourself like that, the more you become that. And it was probably when I got to college and I went into tertiary studies that I suddenly excelled and was top of the class. And somebody once described me as being the most popular person in the class. And I thought, what happened? And I think it was just that the shift in the way I saw myself. So, yeah, I mean, those are some initial thoughts just around how identity shapes us.
Jean-Ray, you've laid some fertile ground there for us to explore, that's for sure. There's a few different areas I would love to gain more insight from you on. The piece you said there about your own experience growing up and then going to university, I'd love to kind of use that as my opening back into what you're saying, because it kind of talks to the fact that identity is malleable. And yet, I think for a lot of people, it doesn't look that way. And so I'm curious, how you see it as where's the opening for people around identity to be able to start to see what identity is and what it isn't so that they can become open to change, because it sounded like you were like, well, that's who I am, and then suddenly you had a realization, oh, like, I'm not that. How has that happened? And that was the question in my mind. It was like, how does that happen? And what is it that people need to know about identity to be able to open themselves up to the opportunity that exists within the world of identity?
Yeah, I suppose I come at it from that basic premise that identity is malleable, because none of us have one identity. I'd hear people, especially when we were younger, and somebody would say, we've got, it's a graduation or some formal event, you must wear a suit and tie. And somebody would say, that's not me. I don't wear suits and ties. That's not me. And I think you cannot possibly define yourself by whether you wear a suit and tie. Where do you get that idea from? Identity is much bigger than that. So if I think of myself, I suppose I would see I have different identities in different spaces. We've got to surely be conscious of that. I mean, I'm a father. I'm a CEO. I'm a scholar. The things I'm a creative. I'm an artist. I'm in building. I love construction and building. I'm a gardener. These are all different things. When I'm in my garden, I'm not a CEO. I'm planting things, and maybe that's part of the problem. We've got our sense of identity so locked down into one thing. As I say, I see it as that our leadership role, and I don't just mean people who are in executive leadership or managers, but just as leaders in the world, where if we find ourselves, we can be leading, is to see and notice good things and call them out. But we can do that by saying, oh, you're really good at that, which is fine. that can be fine. But I think the deeper thing is to start to see, um, start to connect that to your identity. I'm probably not giving a really good answer here, but for me, it is that thing of when it is connected to who you are. It's not just what you do; it beds down much more. Um, I'll certainly try and communicate with people, around you are. I said to somebody once, there's just, and I referenced their Celtic heritage. It was interesting. I was just very aware of something like that. I'm like that. That's something your Celtic ancestors would have done. That's just amazing, strong, um, sort of strong and brave. And it was almost an odd thing to say, but I'm like, but that's who you are. It's in your DNA. It's somewhere deep within you. It's not just something you just did. I think it grounds people a lot. I think one of the things we've lost in modern society with the sort of the fragmentation of families, communities, tribes, all of that, has been that sense of I'm grounded in who I am based on my family history or my tribal history or the village I grew up in, which we used to have days gone by, we had a better understanding of that.
I'm just fascinated by what you've just said, and something you said right at the outset in relation to homelessness, where the homeless person can identify as the villain, the victim, or this potentially brilliant soul. And that's my language, but and the way in which I heard you express it is you see them as a human rather than as a villain or a victim, and so you see this this potential, this malleable thing that has all the possibility in the world to own what they've done and recraft their experience of life. And so what intrigued me about that is, and we've had quite a few guests come on to this show and talk about the power of realizing that you know nothing. And so if I extend that a little bit, and maybe this is a bit of license that you'll permit me, as a leader, when you're truly in service of others and you're in the business of helping broken individuals rebuild themselves in a new form, or you're leading an organization where you're really trying to elevate others into the light, and maybe in some instances they need to stand on your shoulders. But in all of these situations, letting go of the story around identity, allowing the soup of identities to swirl, but fundamentally seeing everybody as human, and on the same sort of plane, and not allowing the narrative about either their narrative about their identity or your narrative about the perceived identity that you're working with to muddy the waters, but rather to play second fiddle to a more base fundamental notion of who we are, and then operating from that place. Because when and I'll give you an example. I went to an event last night in Boston, Earth Night, and like, if you're not if you're not an integral part of that community, it's quite a like an intimidating environment. Like we had the governor Maura Healey doing a speech, and we had renowned academics, the president of MIT, the most successful material scientist from MIT. Like, look, this is an intimidating environment. And I had a young person say to me, "Oh, I'm really nervous about attending." And I said, my advice to you is go in there comfortable that you know nothing and just be curious. And halfway through the evening, she came to me and she said, "Oh, thanks for saying that, because it's really helped. Like I don't really feel nervous anymore. I don't feel intimidated." And so I guess where I'm going with this, and the question I have for you is, in your approach, your very human approach to helping broken individuals find themselves and rebuild through this discipline framework that you guys have pioneered, like the common denominator here is you're a beautiful human being with all the potential in the world, and we've got to help you get back there. And then what you layer on top of that, and the narratives that you accumulate on top of that, hopefully they're good ones and positive and reinforcing ones, but they're not who you are. Does that make sense?
Mm. Yeah, I think so. I mean, it takes us down to, there's always the danger that you create an arrogance with a narrative, or you create something destructive. I think the narrative can be very destructive, or an identity can be very destructive. Often an extreme form of nationalism is quite destructive because it draws, it creates boundaries. I am this, and therefore I'm not that, and therefore you are that, so we are enemies. Can still create something very, very powerful. I think in the United States, we're seeing some very, very powerful nationalist movements. Whether they are helpful or not might be debated. Whether they are, constructive to the human cause.
Mm.
So I think I look at this as not a narrative is not the answer to everything. It is an important way of, sorry, not narrative. Identity is not going to solve everything, but it's an important way for us to understand the reality that we're in and how we shape it. In terms of I think and I've seen this even with our own clients, where what you don't want is to create, I am the champion, I am the hero just because of who I am. Rather, it's understanding what it means to triumph over adversity.
Well, I think you're pointing at a very important thing there. And I'll go back to your anecdote about, oh, I don't wear a suit. Now, there's the individual who fundamentally adheres to the narrative, I don't wear a suit. And then there's the individual who espouses, I don't wear a suit, but is acutely aware that that's just a story.
Yes, I guess.
And so I think what, like, you clearly benefit from the latter, where you have this awareness. It's like when I'm gardening, when I'm planting my tomatoes, I'm not a CEO. Like, you have the awareness of your come from and the story you like to be a part of, versus, I think for some individuals, like, no, I am a Trumper, and this is my nationalist tendency, and black people are inferior, or like whatever narrative you've accumulated attached to, and you don't have the awareness to say, oh, that's a narrative at this current point in time based on my experiences, but that's not who I am.
Yeah,
Fundamentally.
absolutely. I suppose there's got to be a lot of breaking down of this concept that you are fundamentally only one identity. But even if I look at as an outsider to the US, and I'm certainly not up to speed on all the politics. But a lot of this is, I suppose, every American would say to some extent, I am an American. So there's a common sense of identity there. Where we have division at the moment is, what does it mean to be an American? So you've got two very distinct groups saying to be an American means, one says it means this and one says it means that. And so you end up with a very different outcome. And I think that's part of the formation of identity. It's easier to say you are this, you are a human being, but what does that mean? Or if I use the Islamic example, there's many places where to be Muslim means to be peaceful. But there's another group of people who say, no, to be Muslim means to be violent. As you know, religion is such a very, very powerful identity force. So you've seen religion of some sort or another drive massive social movements. If I look at the abolition movement, the anti-slavery movement, very much faith and religion was at the center of that, which was to be Christian means to stand for, the God-given or the divine equality of all people. Was a way of interpreting the data, whereas you had others interpreting it and have interpreted it through history quite differently, which might say we are superior, we created superior. But I think that, that's a key thing, to not get stuck. I suppose that the masses do get stuck on a single identity. That sounds very arrogant. I don't mean to be arrogant, but this is the thing around how do we as leaders take responsibly? How do we lead responsibly to help people break away from destructive narratives around identity? If I take a kind of a step forward with the work we do, I've become very interested in they call the hero's journey framework, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with hero's journey as a framework. Ellen, you're nodding your head. So, but certainly, that's the typical framework of the idea, as Joseph Campbell originally put it together in his kind of famous book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, is that every single great story, legend, myth that stands the test of time is basically the same story. It is the same story. Has the same characters, has the same hero. They just have different names, different faces, but you see the same thing over and over again. And it's a helpful paradigm. I mean, it's not the be all and end all, but it's a helpful paradigm. The more I looked into that, and the concept of essentially we're hardwired to love this story because it's actually all of our own story. That we identify with this idea that I overcome obstacles. I have friends and enemies and shapeshifters and mentors and all these kinds of things around me, people around me, who help me overcome my greatest fears, my greatest obstacles, and then I emerge triumphant out of them. So I've looked at that, and I've looked into particularly the Jungian foundational basis for it, and how Jung understands archetypes and understands the journey, and then uses what you might call a narrative therapy. So the idea of looking at my life, reframing my life, seeing myself as the hero, seeing myself as the same as Aladdin, or the same as what's another example? Simba in The Lion King, if you like. And these are all stories of me. But at every point, I have this choice whether to triumph or not to triumph. And it's again, it comes down to the hero identity, I suppose. And so we're looking a lot from a therapeutic perspective at how do we help people frame their own stories in light of a hero's narrative versus in light of a villain or a victim. Yeah, and I guess it is that thing of just I have to look and reinterpret my own life and the happenings of my life to see myself differently to the way I've always seen me, or the way society has seen me.
You used a word there which I think is so powerful. It's a simple word, but it's choice. And the way that I see this is that it strikes me that most of us don't think that there is such a thing as an objective identity. There's an objective identity of what an American is, or a South African, or an Irish person, or there's an objective identity of what a homeless person is. But that to me strikes as one of the biggest illusions, that there's any such thing as an objective identity. Because it's a choice, because you can change who you think you are in any moment, it's actually entirely subjective. But a lot of people don't really know that to be true. And in one sense, I think that that's what I hear you pointing at in terms of the leadership responsibility is, if you really know that to be true, then the opportunity is to take your responsibility as a leader to a whole new level, and to know that you can open up that perspective to people, say we can choose who we want to be in the world. And that the opposite of that is unfortunately also true. If there are leaders who kind of know that to be true as well, they can manipulate people to maybe unconsciously choose an identity which will not be in service of the world. But it's the lack of fundamental awareness that identity is a choice, and there's no such thing as the right identity. There's no objective answer to this. But I think people, that I think is the biggest illusion. And I still remember I was on a program once, the first time I heard about this, and it was described as, I don't know if Scooby-Doo was a cartoon, and so that, do you guys know the Scooby-Doo cartoon?
Yeah.
And they find the criminal and they're like, who is it? And they pull off the mask, and then they pull off another mask, and then they're like, whoa, it's actually Mr. Smith. And in this program they said, what's actually true is identity is a mask. And what used to scare me was the idea, well, like, what happens when you take off the last mask? And I think that's what you're both pointing at, but I think, Billows, in particular, that's what you were going to. It's that the mask is the choice, the pure humanity, the being part of ourselves is the constant. And then, we get to choose. We can put on our CEO hat, and we can put on our gardener or our podcaster, but they're just like our clothes. It's like it's just the clothes you choose to wear in any moment. And what an opportunity that is. And that's where I guess what I would love to know is, because I don't know about you guys, but when I have conversations sometimes this, I can feel real resistance. Like, people get very attached to their identity. And I would imagine, John Ray, particularly in the world of, if I've been a homeless person and I've been told for the longest time that I am something, and I have, it's become pretty ingrained. I'd love to know, I'd love to know what you think about that, just that, if or anything I said, but I then become really interested in, how do you open up that opportunity to people to see, no, it is a choice. And how have you seen, or where have you seen the greatest leverage points to kind of create an opening between that attachment and a new possibility?
Yeah, I think if I look at the greatest leverage points, as you say, is usually the story of somebody else. So we will deliberately bring people who've walked a whole journey. Your best case is that person stands up in front of a group or gets to know a group and says, let me tell you my story. And everybody goes, oh, I recognize you. You stood at the traffic light. You begged for 15 years there. You were what they call a tikkop, or a drug addict. You and now I see you're completely different. So it opens and I hear that so often from people on the program. It was because I met that person. We used to be together on the street. Now I see them differently. So it's to see somebody else being able to change their whole way of life and their whole way of thinking about themselves, that opens the possibility. I mean, we do it with a lot of discussion groups. A big emphasis for us is readiness for change. So not just putting somebody in a shelter or putting somebody in a rehab program is utterly useless unless they want it. And I think it's not just if they want it, it's they've got to start seeing themselves as something other than what they have been seeing themselves as. Otherwise, they don't really believe they can do it. And that's the biggest obstacle. We find if people go through this, they go through the revolving door over and over. They go into rehab, they relapse, they're back on the street. They go back into rehab, they relapse, they're back on the street. The more times you do that, the more resistant you become to change. And it becomes harder and harder and harder because the inner narratives are, this is who I am, I cannot actually change it.
But I love where that went. You know, you have to see it in others. You have to want to change. But that last piece you said, and I had a conversation with someone about this recently, our propensity to judge ourselves so quickly seems to get in the way of the opportunity that you're pointing to. I think seeing that identity is not fixed is a huge opportunity. And at the same time, it's also can be quite an intimidating or scary opportunity for people because they're like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know if I'm going to be able to. And, it is that hero's journey, and I can't remember all this, but there's part of every hero's journey is the falling down. It's the challenge. It's to fall down and to rise again. But I think one of the biggest things, and again, I'm curious to hear how you would frame this for people as to what's really on offer when you fall down, because the biggest obstacle I think to it is that when we fall down, we immediately judge ourselves and we then tell ourselves, well, there you go. Like it's like our self-saboteur kicks in and goes, I told you not to try this. Now you know who you are. It kind of has that tone of voice. And then it becomes scarier. How would you, frame it up for anybody who might be listening to this thinking, oh, like I am ready for change, but I'm a little bit scared by it as well because I don't know if I'm going to have I don't know if I've got the wherewithal and I may fall down. What would you say to them?
I think two sides of that. The one is, as I've done work with people on our program, our graduates on our program, and how they tell their stories and their narratives, I've said what I need the grittiness of the story. I need you to talk about when you fell down. I need you to talk about when you thought you could not get up. To try and dig into to use hero's journey language, the abyss or the death and resurrection, the ordeal, some's called. What is that when you were at the bottom of yourself? Because there's power in that story. Often stories are used in the nonprofit space to get money from donors, and that is what we have to do as well. But to me, what's really important is to use your own story to understand your own journey and to help others to understand the journey so that they go, oh, I've fallen down and I've fallen down and I've fallen down. But so had Dimitri, for instance, fallen down and fallen down and fallen down. And then he kept getting up. So if he kept getting up, I can keep getting up. And I think this is part of the role of myth and legend and story. And even celebrities, for all of us, is to create some kind of example or story that makes us get up again or makes us understand our own process in the light of somebody else's process. I mean, I think that's one thing. I think another thing is the way we shape, and we're talking in a therapeutic space, but it can be in any space, how we shape a healthy environment, let's say, is by the kind of the axioms or the little sayings that we have. And we would build this into a working environment as well. I think any company would do this. So we would say within the U-Turn context, we say relapse is part of recovery. It's understood. Relapse is part of recovery. You will relapse. That's okay. We're going to pick you up again. That's said enough times, everybody can repeat it. As much as we say, if it's not on Salesforce, it didn't happen. So you keep saying, if it's not on Salesforce, it didn't happen. And so everybody makes sure it gets recorded on Salesforce. And the more one has these little things that one says, the more you create. I mean, those are two vastly different examples, but the more you sort of entrench something. It just also thinking about this from an environmental perspective, I think what becomes important is the way we create. We often see our identity based on our environment. So use that example: when I'm in my garden, I'm a gardener, or when I'm up on the ladder and I'm painting because I love construction. I've built houses and all of those things in my kind of spare time. Then I'll go down to the hardware shop in my ripped jeans and old shoes and covered in paint, and then some people might see me there and think that's how I always look. But when I'm in that space, that's what I am. When I walk into the office, I'm different, and I walk into a meeting, I'm different. So the organization I led before U-Turn was very, very multicultural. We were a team of we were about 50 some when I left. But for much of the time I was there, it was about maybe 25 to 30 staff. We had about 8 different cultural groups with varying different understandings of how the world should be, how the program should run based on their culture. And the way that I kind of navigated what was often a lot of friction in those different groups, was to say, we have to create a culture within this organization which is distinct to the organization. So you might be a white English person when you go home, but here you operate according to company culture. You might be a black Zulu person when you go home, but here you operate according to company culture. I certainly introduced things like we had a way of addressing each other as Bomkaya or Mkaya, which means which is the word Zulu, or Xhosa word, or Zulu word. I think it is actually for countrymen. So you're from the same place. We use it totally not the way it would be used out in colloquial language, but we all used it, and it was a so I might call you in a more formal setting Mkaya Alan or Mkaya Mark, and it replaced so the word comrade was often used within the ANC or some of the political spheres. It has a sort of distinctly communist spin on it, or in some sort of Pentecostal churches, one might say brother or sister or something. But we had our own lingo around it, which was part of this idea of creating an understanding of we have a common identity and a common culture within the space. And when people would say, so people said, well, being on time is a white thing. They said, no, it is a cost, and cost was the organization. That's how we operate. We also happen to eat a good lunch together once a month, which is a very African type of lunch, and that might involve all the offal and innards of the animals, because that's also part of our culture. It doesn't matter if you're white or if you're black. We have. So as a random example. But anyway, we have certain things we're going to do within the space. We're going to operate our meetings in a certain way within the space, which is distinctive. And so we have that clear sense of identity. And what I found as I began to entrench that more and more is the clashes between different cultural groups diminished. So we got less of, oh, you do that because you're white, you do that because you're black, you do that because you're Indian. It diminished. We start to develop a clear identity, clearer cultural norms around the way we deal with authority, or the way we deal with workflows. Or I'm not sure if that's making sense. But again, to me, it came down to a clearer understanding of we create a corporate identity, and then that defines us in that space. In U-Turn, I'm jumping all over, so I hope I make sense. In terms of creating a motivation for change, which is the big first step when we deal with people on the street, it's a volition-based service. People come in and they go out at will. Nobody has to stay there. But while they're in the space, there are norms and rhythms which have to be followed. So if you feel like, I don't want to do this, well, you can leave. But you can't just sit there in the corner and not participate, because that's the way we do things here. It's one of the things I've seen in so many other organizations across South Africa and across the world, where you can participate or not participate in what's going on, and that's absolutely fine. And that's one of the differences we have. I think we say when you're in the space, if you walk in here, this is the way it works here. And then people find it easier to start to say, okay, when I walk in there, that's how I behave there. And then they do. And then they start to think of themselves the way everybody thinks of themselves in that space. So one could call it manipulative, and I suppose in some sense it is always manipulative, but it's trying to create a healthy environment which gets people thinking in a healthy way, and gently and firmly pushes them into that direction.
Well, Billows always says this, that it's not what you're doing, but it's the place that it comes from that counts. And that's what I hear in what you're saying. It's the come from that matters. Is it, manipulative? Maybe, but in the best possible way, because it's creating an opportunity for people's behaviors to show them the possibility beyond what they might think is there in the first place. So, and that's what I was coming back to before. I was even jotting it down. Is there's creating awareness that change is possible, and then I love that expression that you had, creating the motivation for change, and that's a creative task all on its own, to try and and that's what I heard there, is that, if you're here, then this is what it's going to mean to be here, and then people are making the first choice, I guess, is, well, no, I do want to be here, so I guess I'll live up to those rules. The bit I also heard, though, for other organizations, and it really struck me, and I don't know what Billows thought, was, maybe it's how delicate or sensitive we've all become to being able to go, like, yeah, no, if you want to be here, this is what it means to be here, and you can choose not to be here. Like, that's the choice. You can choose not to be here. Like, that's okay. But if you do choose to walk in this door, then this is what this looks like. This is our identity. And it strikes me that values then start to come into play. This is what our identity is. Therefore, this is what we value. And therefore, this is the behaviors you're going to see. It feels like you've pulled a thread right through those three areas to go identity first, then be clear on what we value as a result of that identity. And then as a result of that, these are the behaviors that we engage in, not because of anything other than this is what we've decided that we are here. But I think the world has become very sensitive to the idea that you can be that forthright about things, or particularly maybe in the business context. I don't know. Like, I'm interested, Bill, as whether you think that's true or not, or
No, I think you're right. I think the world has become quite gun shy of doing that, but I think effective organizations do that very well. And I think, if we just take our own experience at Mimecast, there was the Mimecast way, and that evolved over time. But even before it was codified, there was a strong sense of this is how we show up here, and by virtue of that, these are the values we hold dear and the behaviors we engage in, and it's not for everybody, and so you get to self-select in or out. And yeah, so I think great organizations do that unashamedly, and they do it brilliantly. And I mean, there are myriad examples, whether it's corporate or sporting teams. I mean, I'm sure we could rattle off a whole bunch of iconic sporting teams that do that incredibly well and embrace that sort of paradigm. But Jean-Ray, I just wanted to kind of just almost sort of bring us to the end of the hero's journey when the hero returns home full of this wisdom and this insight, having fallen into the abyss and picked themselves up multiple times and seen what they need to see. And I'm curious, if you look at the people who come through the U-Turn program successfully, and I remember you telling me when I chatted to you in Cape Town about this, one of the people who'd come through and had actually ended up running one of your retail outlets, and now was potentially going to be sort of elevated to a pretty senior role within the org. When people come through the program successfully and they see what they've meant to see, and they're filled with this profound sense of wisdom, what are they seeing?
Okay, if I understand that from what you're saying about the hero's journey, when you reach the end and you return with the elixir into, and that's one of the questions you asked. What is normality like? What is normal life like before, and what is normal life like now? Because that is the hero back in the real world, out of this program, or
They've
this
come
faraway
home.
place, or this have come home. The classic things, I suppose there's 5 things we're working towards constantly. There's 5 continuums, and we work from the beginning all the way through to the end, and you hear it come out in the stories. This is what's changed. The housing continuum is the obvious one. So I'll go from sleeping under the bridge to having my own house or my own home, whatever it may look like. Sometimes it's return to family and I'm back with my mom. Most cases, we actually have our own home. There's the sobriety continuum. So it starts with I was always high. I was shooting up heroin. I was, unable to function at all. I was almost dead. These kind of stories, through to I'm living a sober life. I'm in complete control of my life. There's the work continuum, which is typically starts with I used to steal whatever I could steal, or scuttle, as we call it here, get some recycling from somewhere and take boxes in and get a bit of money, or find a little bit of money for your next fix, through to I have a stable job now. One of the beautiful things they often say is this. What we talk about a trolley in South Africa as a shopping cart, let's say, just to translate for the American audience. So I used to push a trolley down the street, because they'll push these shopping carts down and along the street with all their worldly belongings. And now I push a trolley or a shopping cart in Pick and Pay or Checkers, or the local Walmart, let's say. And it's this contrast of how I used to live to how I live now. The other 2 things we focus on a lot is this rebuilding of relationships. So you often hear this thing of, my children were taken away from me because I was living on the street. I was an addict. I couldn't look after them. And now my children are back with me. Or my mother had thrown me out and wouldn't speak to me. Now I have an amazing relationship with my mother. So relationships, or the community I'd been thrown out of the community. Now I'm running a little, I don't know, some kind of social program in that community. So I've moved from being this dysfunctional person to being somebody who gives back. And then, of course, the other areas really around mental health and self-management. It's just broader than addiction. It's, I used to be an angry person. I stabbed people. Nobody could have a reasonable conversation with me. Now I'm the stable person who's giving back and knows how to deal with my emotions and knows how to regulate myself. And that. So in terms of those are the 5 things we're working on all the way through. What does it look like, and how are you doing on these things? Richard, did that answer that question?
Yeah, it did. And it was a fascinating answer, because the answer that I wanted to hear, for my own sort of thoughts on this, is oh, I am actually I am a brilliant human. I am human, and I am brilliant, and I have all this potential. And that's not what I heard. What I heard was far more kind of functional, and probably far more realistic, for somebody to go from this sense of having fallen, being broken, thinking that they're broken, to 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 being proud of those 5 elements that you outlined, that by virtue of the program they have a strong sense of ownership and agency around, versus somebody going, I'm a worthless piece of whatever, I'm subhuman, to actually, I am human. I am part of the human race. I'm as beautiful as the next person next to me, despite what I've done. I have this potential. I have this brilliance.
Yeah.
But that might be, that's me putting a Bilby spin on it and wishing that was the answer. But I'm not sure that it always
No,
is.
I mean, I think that underlies it. It's coming to the understanding. So there's this practical side in any story.
Yeah.
The hero returns with the sword or with whatever. It's a real thing. You can hear and touch. And there's probably lots and lots of stories. Every second nonprofit is going to have their clients saying, I used to feel so terrible about myself, and now I feel great about myself, which is nice. But also, what does that mean in practice?
I like the practicality of it.
I think it was Bianca we were talking about too. Yeah, we were talking about her moving up to Johannesburg. I mean, I've got many remarkable people, but probably 1/4 of our staff, maybe more now, are graduates of our own program. Because we do pick out the best ones, I suppose. Not always. Sometimes we can't afford them. We just lost one of our human resource guys. He got poached for 3 times the cost, and he'd been homeless himself. He comes through our program. But yeah, I mean, with somebody like her, what I find amazing is, so she came through. She'd lived on the streets for, I think it was 12 years, being an addict. Her now husband, boyfriend, I think at the time, said, let's go to U-Turn. Let's try and get off the streets. They'd been on for so long, and went through that program. I remember her saying a few times, it was the environment. I liked who I was in that space. I didn't want to go back and it's again, how the environment, you step into a healthy environment and you like yourself. You say, this is who I want to be. This space helps me. But yeah, I mean, long story short, she did become we gave her a contract after she graduated, short-term contract in one of our retail outlets. And then she moved up from that till she's currently has been heading up all of our southern suburbs and central, so the CBD area of Cape Town, big area. All of those stores fall under her. Now she's handling the Johannesburg retail side as well. Which I'm saying you can't really do Cape Town and Joburg. You're going to have to choose because the system's too big. But what is absolutely amazing about her story is she doesn't just understand retail, which she's got to understand really well. She runs successful shops. She understands, because our model is people who are coming through the program work in those shops, in those stores. So we have to create an environment itself that is conducive to recovery and is helping them to move through that sort of psychological but also practical skills journey. You can't just take a homeless person, especially if they've been on the street for 17 years, and put them into a job. That's a total misnomer. People have this idea that will solve the problem. They have no idea how to even put deodorant on, let alone how to deal with customers with complaints, or how to pitch up every day and actually be present. So there's a whole graded process for that. So I've now, Bianca as an example, is somebody who has herself walked that journey and has this incredible understanding. When I was first sent up to Johannesburg now, and we lost our retail area manager there, and it's a smaller system. We just got 3 or 4 shops there. Sent up for a few weeks, and they just said she's incredible because she understands exactly what's going on in the minds of the champions, as we call them, the clients who are now working in the shop, and she can call out their behavior, and she's not manipulated by that behavior because it can be very manipulative. And she also understands how to integrate that into the working environment. So, I mean, that's one beautiful story for me of somebody who can show not only was I on the street, that was normal. Now my job is I'm not just standing behind a counter. I am setting up new stores. I am setting up new regions. And I'm doing this with this very particular focus around homeless people, which is a whole skill, that's way beyond just a retail skill. Yeah. Anyway, that's some comments on her as a person. I've got several that I think I maybe mentioned to you as well. As our head of IT at U-Turn is one of our graduates. Brilliant. Could probably get 5 times as much somewhere else, but he's so, dedicated to this organization. And again, understands how to operate that within this context. Anyway, I could talk long about those things.
Well, I would imagine, and hopefully we'll have more conversations, Jean-Ray, because I think there's so much just touching. I feel like we're touching the surface of some really, like there's places here we could go a hell of a lot deeper on, because that last example there that you touched your IT manager, I was just thinking about how many leaders, the real opportunity of when you're playing to the level that you are talking about, like the strength of an organization that get conformed, that can get formed as a result of that is massive. And I think you've laid a huge amount of breadcrumbs today for, if you're listening to this conversation as a leader of an organization or a team, or actually I think it could be family unit. There's just so much of this to be able to go like, or as an individual, what you're pointing at is available to everybody. It kind of does, like, I like the hero's journey. It's all a bit of a hero's journey, though. There isn't, unfortunately, just a nice, simple, just you're A, B, and it's super easy. It's like, no, listen, it requires commitment, and it requires seeing this opportunity and going into it, which I think is massive. We do have, and I do hope we're back. We do have a closing tradition on the podcast. If you could create a bumper sticker for life, what would your bumper sticker say, and why?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose in the moment, in this life of this conversation, you can be and become anything you want to. It sounds a little bit cliched, and there are limitations to that. But I think certain things you cannot become. You'll never be able to become, a dog or something. Much as some people have that idea. but certainly, yeah, we have the power to be so much.
Yeah. I like that bumper sticker. You can be or become anything you want, and then just on the bottom of the bumper sticker is maybe not a dog.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, obviously there are limitations, right? There's a very broad,
I think that's so in keeping with what you've been pointing to, and the power of awareness and the power of understanding the narrative you choose, and the narrative you choose to live, and what's on offer from that place of awareness, and it echoes through the episodes that have come before, and I'm super excited about having you back, because, as Elle said, I think we're just beginning to scratch the surface of some really juicy topics, and get insights from somebody who, quite frankly, I think compared to most of us, has delved into a role, a leadership role, a mission that affords a perspective that I would say the majority of us are not exposed to, because I think you're dealing with some tough stuff head on, and as a result of that, you're seeing difficult, beautiful things, and the wisdom that flows from the work that you're doing, I think is fascinating and has the potential to touch a lot of hearts and open a lot of minds. And so I'm very grateful that you've spent this time with us, and can't wait to have you back.
It's been very enjoyable for me, I must say that, and thought-provoking.
Well, no, thank you very much, Jean Ray, for coming on. And if anybody wants to learn more about your organization, yourself, what you do, where are we best to point them?
So the U-Turn's website is www.homeless.org.ca, homeless.org.ca. I suppose if people can Google me, I have an unusual name. I don't have a beautiful laid out. My LinkedIn is probably hopelessly out of date, and I don't have a beautifully, put together bio on there. But if people are interested in me, there's always lots that would come up online about me or what I do. But I think for U-Turn, homeless.org.ca is the place. Again, all Googling U-Turn Homeless in South Africa, a lot will come up about this.
Brilliant. Cool.
And
we'll
Jean Ray, sorry,
but let's go. No, go for it.
No, I was going to say I would love to include some of the information about some of the awards that U-Turn has won and been recognized for. So I know you were going to send me some stuff, so we'd love to include that in the show notes as well, so people can just get a sense of the global impact you're having as well, in terms of the way people are thinking about homelessness and the incredible work you're doing.
Yeah, no, definitely send that. I know we can be quite contentious sometimes. I might have mentioned to you when I was speaking at the International IJOH International Conference in January. I had a number of people walk out of one of my sessions, and then some people tackle me quite hard, which is always fun. So, sometimes you say, well, I'm a South African. This is my African context. In Canada, where most of those people are from, it might look quite different. But this is what we know. Yeah.
Never apologize for being a disruptor, my friend. Innovation requires disruption.
The world go forward.
Yeah. Well, Jean Ray, thank you so much again, and I'll let Elle wrap it up. But it's been an absolute pleasure, and I can't wait to have you in Boston, and look forward to putting an awesome event together. And if we do manage to pull that off, we'll make sure that people know about it on the show as well.
Fantastic.
Jean Ray, from my side, thank you so much for coming on. It's been awesome. For our listeners, I hope, as always, you've enjoyed it as much as we have. And I'll maybe just conclude with Jean Ray's bumper sticker for life. We can be and become anything we choose to be. And as we were going through this, it made me think of a Walt Whitman quote that I heard once, which was, "Do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes." And we would invite you to all live into that. You are so much more than even what you think you might be, and just being prepared to look beyond that and into the power of that choice is an awesome opportunity for all of us in whatever position we currently stand. So with that, thank you for tuning in. And as always, go forth and live into your brilliance.